into submission or something like that. Maybe he got a copy. I have not found a guy to reproduce these. I mean, I've got the full 15-minute Butch interview, which you probably have seen bits and pieces of.
Yeah, I've seen pieces.
With the loud jacket and all that.
Right.
Have you seen the stuff on YouTube?
Yeah, Before Skull Rocks. I've seen that.
Yeah.
I definitely, obviously, that is a necessity for the documentary.
Yeah, the full 15-minute thing is fabulous.
Yeah.
That was Jeff Menchez was taking a course in videography or whatever the fuck it is at what was it, to Montgomery College. So he would come to me and say, we got an open project, which let's do an Elvis sighting, or let's do that's where that.
Right, that was
yeah. And so we would trot in there, and here's this poor professor guy in this class full of Montgomery College reject dumbasses, and we'd walk in there with people like Elvis and Butch, and do these big interviews. At the end of the show, it's like everybody was like sort of like, shit.
So when did you first hear of Butch Willis?
Well, in the record store in Tacoma Park, when we opened up in, I guess, 74, it only took a couple of years for the really crazy people to find me. And what it was is that Root Boy started hanging out in there because he sort of began he lived up the street. He began his music career in Tacoma Park, and Butch was very much enamored with Root Boy. Root Boy opened the door for Butch in that, a slobby-looking maniac could be very popular, in a rock band, I guess. So Butch said, I want this. And so what happened is, that Butch's father would drive him to my store at 12 o'clock every day and just drop him off and wouldn't pick him up till 6. So, I mean, I was in essence running a daycare center, I guess, and here's 12 noon, here's Butch walking in. Hey, Joe, I need a gig, man. I need a gig. I want to be a rock and roll star. So what happened was we had a recording studio right across the street, and Butch had gotten in touch with local musicians and setting up recording his first album. And I started asking questions of Butch. Are you paying these guys? Oh yeah, they want $100 each session and all. And basically he was being soaked. And I tried to get him to cool it, to stop. And you don't say no to Butch Willis, especially when he's off his meds. So they finished that album, and it just seemed like the merciful thing to do. Instead of him paying these guys every bit of inheritance that he ever got in his life, we just formed a band that basically did not need to be paid, and there was no pressure on the group because it was already sort of a foregone conclusion that this wasn't going straight to the top. But it was very, very amusing, and one day Al Breon came walking into the store, and he was hitting his throat, making these weird sounds, and I think he was doing Malagueña or something like that. And I said, listen, buddy, do you want to be part of a rock and roll group? And one thing led to another. And he ended up being on Butch's second album, and he was there at Primitive Night on stage with Butch, and we called it throat guitar. And it kind of freaked people out. They'd never seen anything like it. They didn't know whether to take it seriously, and because there's guys, these Alaskan people that, do nose whistling and ear popping and God knows what else, and it's just something that happened. It's very, very, very strange. But anyway, so Butch was very much enamored with Root Boy, and ended up living in the same apartment as Root Boy. That is when it really, really got scary. I remember one day that they decided, somebody gave Root Boy a window air conditioner unit. And Butch and Root Boy decided they were going to walk it upstairs and put it in the window and thus have air conditioning. Wouldn't that be great? Well, neither two of those guys are technically anything to write home about. So they're putting the machine in the window. Of course, the thing topples out. They're 2 floors up, and the thing just explodes on the sidewalk below. You could hear it for blocks. And the last thing I remember is some guy running up the street. I think it just missed him by about a half an inch. But that was like a common occurrence there at the Root Boy Butch Willis apartment building. And I remember one time, there was a rivalry going on there. And basically, Butch was very, very jealous of Root Boy at that point, because Slim was getting big crowds and lots of ink and whatever. So at one point, I was taking Root Boy down to Sanford, Florida, to a recording studio down there. And while I was gone, apparently Butch was consumed with jealousy. He wasn't getting any attention. And the apartment was right above a place called the House of Musical Traditions. It had all these old, lutes and violins and, ancient African instruments and whatever. Some pretty expensive, rare stuff. So this is the morning that, of course, Slim's gone, I'm gone. He's not getting any attention. He's mad, and he grabs a 2x4 and he starts wrecking the apartment, including the commode. So, what happens when you bat the crap out of a toilet? Well, it overflows. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, the people from the House of Musical Traditions open the doors for business, and they walk in, and the ceiling is sort of hanging low like a pregnant woman's stomach. So they are totally freaked out. They call the fire department. The fire department comes rushing up, and the lead fireman says, it's going to give, we have to do something. He pokes it. All this water went down and just completely filled up the House of Musical Traditions. The place had to have been a complete total loss. Well, I get back from Sanford, Florida, and I said, well, where's Butch? And I said, well, he's over at St. Elizabeth's for the next couple of weeks. And they explained to me what happened. And I went up and talked to David Eisner, the owner of the House of Musical Traditions, and he was kind of upset. But there was always something going on there, and they were, unfortunately, Root Boy and Butch, their apartment was right across the hall from a coke dealer, this little slimy-looking guy named Dunny. And those are 2 guys that probably shouldn't do any unprescribed drugs at all, I'm telling you. And just every day something very, very weird happened there. But that was Tacoma Park back in the 70s, and you had to go with it. So at some point, we did the second Butch album, and we threw out all the high-priced guys, and Jeff Menches produced it. He was, of course, the lead singer for No Trend, and was working in the record store full time. And we got Al Breon, and we got, it was a big freebie. Butch had to pay the guy with the recording studio, I think $30 an hour, something like that. And we knocked the whole thing out in 6 hours probably, something like that. And then Jeff did this marvelous mix on the album. It was just a great, great album, I thought. And he ended up getting a superb review in the local papers. Most people didn't quite know what to make of Butch Willis, but every once in a while you'd run into somebody like Joe Sassby or Eddie Bronx or whatever who got it, who could figure it out. And they were usually people that did not like corporate rock, Journey or even Bruce Springsteen for that matter. They like something more soulful and something with a personality and something that had a little insanity thrown in. That's Butch. There you go. So there was the album comes out, and of course, it's on Butch's label, the Love label, with no distribution, no hope for airplay. no nothing. So I had just boxes and boxes of these things in the record store, and I'd sell one every once in a while. Somebody with a smirk would come in and ask for the Butch Willis album. But there was one weird little guy who would come in, and he used to buy heavy metal music. Like death metal, that kind of stuff. And he bought a copy of the Root Boy album. And then the next time he came back, he bought about 5 or 10 of them. And then he asked me, he says, will you give me a break for, quantities of this? And I said, you betcha. And he was buying box lots, 25 or 30 count boxes at a time. And it got kind of scary because this guy seemed to be out of the loop. Why would he be buying this album? This is not a normal album by any stretch of the imagination. TVs from outer space, kitty cat, weird material like that. So finally, after about the 8th or 9th visit to the store, and he's buying box lots up, I grabbed him. I said, look, what are you doing with these things? Are you burning them, or what's going on? He says, no, man, I found this bunch of people up in New York State, and they really love Butch, and I just keep sending them boxes, and they keep paying me for them, So I didn't pursue that any further because I decided I probably didn't want to get mixed up with them. God knows what was going on up there. I hate to think. Anyway, so the thing actually is that when we did, play a gig somewhere, it always ended up being a lot of fun. And then people started videotaping the shows. And then, what was it? They hired Butch to play the 930 Club, which, most of the local musicians would, kill to get into the 930 Club. Turns out he opened up for a group called the Butthole Surfers, who were very, very popular with the punk and underground scene back then. And here's Butch opening up for these guys, and Butch is like so nervous, I thought he was going to levitate off the stage. But he got through the show, and I remember looking out at the crowd, and people just sitting there watching Butch on stage, just going like, what, and what's this guy with with his throat? What is this, Please explain it to me. And of course, there was never any explanation. We would get up, do the show, and get going, and leave them wondering. So we left a lot of people wondering there. One of the more memorable shows was at Friendship Station, which was a club I used to book, and we found this guy, the legendary Stardust Cowboy. And he had a hit way back in the 60s, and he was a full-fledged maniac. There was no question about it. And he was from Texas, and I think it was T-Bone Burnett that produced him back in 67 or something like that. And so here comes the legendary Stardust Cowboy that, not a whole lot of people know about. The funny thing is that David Bowie did, and that's how he got, Ziggy Stardust, and, blah, blah, blah. He freely acknowledges that he got, the name of that album from the legendary Stardust Cowboy. So for some reason, I let the Stardust Cowboy stay over at my house, which I'll never forget. He was, making flapping sounds late at night. It's just very strange human being. But it was a pretty good show because Butch opened up for him, and it was sort of like a battle of the maniacs, and actually a pretty good crowd showed up for this thing. If you could imagine a couple hundred people with shit-eating grins on their faces all night long. And somebody videotaped that. I remember seeing that because they gave Butch this big, huge intro, and he went rushing on stage, tripped over an amp, boom, down on the floor. It was, it was a Butch Willis intro all the way. But somewhere along the line, it just couldn't sustain. I guess Root Boy started falling apart, and Butch started falling apart, and one or the other would go off his meds and end up being incarcerated, or and Butch couldn't hold on to a penny. no matter how you tried to get him to settle down and to not just throw his money away, he always would. I remember some coke dealer in Tacoma Park who would sell him mannitol for like $80 a little. Mannitol is baby laxative. So here's Butch sneaking around snorting this stuff, thinking that he's high on cocaine. And no, he had to go to the bathroom like 8 times a day. And, I tried to tell him, Butch, stop doing this, But he didn't. So, Anyway, I'm trying to think of what else. There's a million stories.
Right. Any more drug-related things you can talk about Butch?
Well, I remember towards the end there, people would call me up and tell me, I saw Butch Willis in Tacoma Park walking along, and he had this look on his face like he was going to kill somebody. And I said, well, that probably means he's off his meds. And I said, well, somebody needs to go talk to his brother. His brother, Mike, was one of the most negligent people in the world, still is. And, Mike just basically, why should I give a shit, So I think Butch ended up going a little bit crazy in the local Highs store or 7-Eleven, whatever. And they called the police on him, and into the Who's Gal he went, and somewhere along the line they discovered that the man needs some medicine. So they doused him pretty good, and then no one heard from Butch at all. And finally I found out he was in some place in Baltimore, and he wasn't about to get out anytime soon. And then actually he did make it out. We had a 20-year reunion of Primitive Night, which is a show that we did at the Psychedelic, of all places, in Bethesda, Maryland. The Psychedelic, this was on Friday the 13th, April 13th, 1984.
Was there only one Primitive Night, or was it like a...
Well, there was only one real Primitive Night. Now, we had, 20 years later, we had, in 2004, at the American Film Institute, they were running this film called Off the Charts, which is basically about people who, if you ever have bought like a music publication and seen a little ad that says, send us your poems, we'll turn them into songs. And, of course, Butch did that. Here's me trying to tell Butch, don't give your money away to these crooks and things like that. Well, they're going to make me a star, man. So, he sends them his lyrics, and they put the song on an album. Oh, if I could find this album, I bet Tommy Ardolino from NRBQ has got it, because he apparently has all those things. But they took, it was a song from his first album that, if you play Butch doing it, his version of those lyrics, and you play these hacks from Nashville doing it, it's just completely, totally different. And these hacks, it's just like a routine. They know that people sending these lyrics in are nuts. So, and what they do is they say, for another, $600, we could probably get this on an album, okay, and then boom, you send off checks and all this stuff. And they got him pretty good, I must say. But this thing at the American Film Institute was a documentary done on these guys from Nashville who do this. And then they started interviewing some of the people who send the lyrics too. And I had remembered that Butch had gotten involved with this, and so I went to the American Film Institute with this documentary and said, this is hysterical. You really need to show it. And they loved it. So they decided to go with a reunion of the original Primitive Night people, those that are still with us or not in jail or whatever. And we had the dudes there, and I tried to get Butch, but they wouldn't let him out of wherever he was in Baltimore. Either that or his brother Mike, just wouldn't even tell him about it. I don't know. But Mike Miller was there, and but the very first Primitive Night was actually the invention of Joe Sassby. I was telling Joe Sassby about all the people that, since I was booking the Psychedelic, I was getting like 10,000 calls a day, and half of them were nuts. People saying, here's my demo tape. It's me singing in a bathtub, or stuff like that. And Sassy says to me, Jolie, why don't you get all those people together and do like a night, all in one night and call it Primitive Night? And, it just seemed like such a great idea because they all had, family and a crowd of their own. And if you put enough of them together, you're going to get a full house. And they don't care about being paid or anything like that. They just basically want some attention. That's all they want is attention. So that was one of the wildest shows I have ever seen. I mean, absolutely the nuttiest thing. Thank God somebody did a cassette tape off the board that night, and we have, I guess we don't have any pictures, we don't have any, it was probably pre-video, it was that long ago. But we do have a tape of that night, and you can see that it's just really got out of control. We had, Butch, I guess this was the first time Butch had ever performed on stage, and we had just gotten him Al on throat guitar, and, nobody knew what to expect. Nobody even knew who Butch Willis was. And here he gets up there, and, he was so nervous that, it was like just a blur. And there's Al up there hitting his throat and all that, and it was just real crazy. And people, people were really either taken aback or greatly amused or very confused or upset. It's just anything. Ran the gamut, I guess. And we had the Doots, who was from Virginia, and who probably had the worst voice of anybody that had ever tried to sing, and he was there doing his big hit, ACNE, I Got Acne. And then we had a group called White Boy that was fronted by an older fella named Mr. Ott, who years later ended up being arrested for child molestation, and honest to God received, I think, 150 years in jail. So you're not going to see him. You're not going to see him anytime too soon. Oh Lord, Ray Wallace was there, and Ray is another case, and he came out and did a couple of Rick Nelson songs. It was real weird, and people still come into the store years and years later, 20, 25 years later, talking about that show, because no one's going to forget that show, because they had never seen anything like it before, and they will never see anything like it ever again. I guarantee you that.
Can you talk about on the Forestville Rocks program? There's a fog machine. At some point, it looks like you're kind of just fed up with the fog machine, and you get up and leave.
So I get a call from Jeff Krulik, who is a local filmmaker and got a pretty good sense of humor too, and he says, we want to use your guy Butch to do, like a rock video. What do you say? And I say, well, we'll take anything anyone will give us, believe you me, as long as it doesn't cost anything. So he had us all down there to Forestville, and that was very, very strange. For some reason, Krulik, I guess, thought that it would be really appropriate or neat to have a smoke machine. So here I'm playing drums, and he's got this god-awful thing belching this industrial smog, it was just so horrible. And I asked him to, can you put this somewhere else or turn it down a bit? No one would listen to me. And I kept complaining about it, and in between songs, it's like it got worse and worse. Finally, I just had to get up and leave. I don't think I would have survived that day because this was not normal smoke. This was like something that is coming out of the heart of the worst dump you've ever smelled in your life. Just awful. So yeah, I split, and luckily they had somebody else that came in and subbed on the drums. But I had to go out and puke for about 2 hours. It was awful.
Who was the other drummer?
Ken Rude. Now Ken Rude's gonna play some drums. Anyway, you know what? If you did Breon now,
yeah,
I would remember everything that I haven't brought up, you know. I'm good for about a half an hour, then
Those tapes almost...
he calls me every week, basically. Butch calls me up every week, and there's always some new plan going or some sort of thing happening. But his latest thing is that he wants to work at the record store. And God bless him, I remember he wanted to work in the record store 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago. We opened up in 74, and I guess it must have been around 77 or so that he popped up. And I had him, at one point I was alone in the store. I needed to go to the bank to put in a couple of deposits. And there were people in the store. I couldn't, you know. So I said, Butch, can you run these down to the bank and just hand them to the teller? Then they'll hand you back 2 receipts. And he came back with 1 receipt. And I said, Butch, where is the other receipt? I don't know. They only gave me back 1. And I kind of knew what had happened there. I had lost a day's deposit from the record store. So I had to call up his mom and say, look, you know, I can't have this. Somebody's going to have to pay for this. And I think one of the things that had happened around the same time is that he had taken his portion of the rent that, you know, Root Boy was supposed to pay, and told Root Boy and me that some guy had come to the front door and pulled a gun on him and taken the money from him. Well, now, what he had done is taken the money and gone to that stupid coke dealer who sold him baby laxative for cocaine, and that's where the money went. So I called his mom up and I said, look, you know, you're going to have to come in and we're going to have to figure this out. I don't want to have to go to the police or something like that. I mean, you know, that's too miserable. So she and her husband showed up, and they just looked as if they were crushed. I mean, I don't know whether that was their normal demeanor or you know, or that was just the day or what. But anyway, what I did not know is that Mrs. Willis and Root Boy did not like each other at all, because when she walked in and saw Root Boy sitting there, and he was always sitting there in my store in the big green chair. I mean, that was his chair, and he spent, you know, half a lifetime there. She walks in, she sees him, and actually starts hissing. I mean, I've never seen a person, you know, dead serious hissing at someone else. I thought that's something you heard about, but you would never see. And she's looking at him, and she's just hissing. And she says, "You're nothing but white trash." Yeah, Root Boy looks at her and says, "Yeah, and you're a genetic cesspool." Which, you gotta give it to Slim. He's pretty quick, I guess. But they made good on the bank deposit that didn't quite make it to the bank, and that was the end of that particular incident. Which reminds me of...
I'm sorry, can you take your glasses off?
Oh, that's right, I didn't have them on before. Damn it. Is it okay? I don't have to retell that story?
No.
Okay. I do remember that when he was working in a head shop, Butch Willis actually had a full-time job at a head shop in Tacoma Park called Maggie's Farm, and they sold marijuana pipes and, you know, little cocaine kits and all this garbage. And there was this very seedy person named Dunny who lived upstairs, who owned the Maggie's Farm. And Dunny was strung out on freebase, which is what they used to call crack cocaine before it was known as crack cocaine. And Dunny was just really gone on this stuff. And at some point, he just stopped leaving his apartment. He became so paranoid and strange and weird and addicted that Dunny would not leave the apartment. Well, he didn't even go to the head shop downstairs. It was that bad. So here's Butch down there running this head shop, and you know, he just was, you know, you didn't leave your business to Butch Willis. I'm sorry. So Butch fakes this holdup, or at least what he does, he tells Dunny, "Hey, we got held up. Some guy pulled a gun on me and took $200 out of the register." And of course, it went to the mannitol dealer. But you know what? Dunny couldn't do anything about it. Dunny didn't believe it either. But Dunny was like strung out basically on crack, and he couldn't go to the police, nor could he fire Dunny because he was at this point incapable of hiring anybody else to run Maggie's farm. So just like clockwork, every couple months, we got held up again. They got $250 this time, and it just seemed to keep happening. And there was Dunny, who was not happy about it, but I guess that's the price you pay to be fucked up on crack. I got another zinger here. Let me see.
I've some couple questions.
This was okay, yeah. So, after Butch's first album, and even after the second album, or album as he would call them, I tried to sort of get him around, which is not an easy thing to do. You can't send a demo tape of Butch Willis out and expect anyone to get it, at least not a normal person. So at one point, we entered him into the Alney Ale House talent show, just to sort of keep him fresh, keep him performing in front of a crowd. And so he shows up, and he shows up alone. And I said, well, Butch, where's your group? And he looks at me and he says, I ain't got no virtuosos in my group, so I'm going to sing a cappella. And I've never forgotten that, because he just had that sort of special kind of Baltimore accent and terminology that you never knew quite what you were going to get from him. And that was a killer, that one. But it wasn't long after his appearance at the Alney Ale House that they stopped having the Alney Ale House talent show. So they were greatly impressed, believe me. Let me look at it. I got one more thing here, which is, I wanted to bring up the Galaxy Hut too. I assume that's what Dick was talking about.
So, I couldn't figure out what he was talking about. That must be what he was talking about.
One of the greatest shows that Butch ever did, and it was just a teeny little club in Northern Virginia called the Galaxy Hut. And Joe Sassby called me up, and at the time Joe was working for Time Life Warner, doing all those compilations on rock and roll and country and everything else. And Charlie McCardle also was working there, and Joe calls up and says, Butch is going to be at the Galaxy Hut. We got to go see the show. You're coming, aren't you? Well, that's a long ride, but I met Joe over at the house and Charlie, and we went on over to the Galaxy Hut, not really knowing what to expect, because at that point he was on Teenbeat, and he had a new group, and I sort of lost touch with him. And he got in there, and he was appearing a cappella, just by himself. But the difference is that I guess Mark had really gotten him around, because he had a packed house in there. And when he got up and started singing his insane songs, there was, 100 people singing along with him. And I said to myself, wow, that's really neat, because these people get it. They understand. And, here's Butch singing, drugs will do it to you. And you hear the entire crowd going, rock, rock, rock. I mean, it was totally unplanned. And yet it was just one of those sort of great moments in a person's life that, he had been completely redeemed. And I've never forgotten that. That was a great night. And then later on, I read in the paper that Mark Robinson had given him a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I probably laughed for 10 straight days. I mean, I woke up laughing about that. It was just such a great idea. I mean, Mark was able to sort of keep the tradition going. So I'm glad that he's in good hands.
Excellent.
Give credit where credit's due.
Thank you. So you knew Butch before he was interested in music? Because I think he told me yesterday that he didn't start writing songs until, like, you know, April 5th, 1980.
I'm not so sure that I thought it was maybe it was 1980.
Okay.
Again, Butch's older brother was sort of a mainstay in Tacoma Park. I mean, he was a drug dealer. Let's cut the shit and you'd see Butch every once in a while over there, and he was completely unhinged. And you'd heard things about an LSD casualty. There was another story about he used to be a jockey and a horse had kicked him in the head. Maybe it was one or the other or both. Who the hell knows? But when Rude Boy Slim ended up, being a big success on stage in Washington, D.C., and I actually got him signed to Warner Brothers. I still don't understand how that happened, but Butch just... You could see the great transformation. I want to be a rock star. I don't want to be nothing but a rock star. And that he has hinged onto that for the last 20, 25 years and never gotten off it. I mean, he's had some very appreciative crowds. And he's had, I remember, an incredible article in the Washington Post on him where... of course, the writer was Joe Sassby, just did a brilliant job of describing to the 500,000 people who read the Washington Post, who Butch Willis is and the kind of music he does and all that. He called it raw and primitive and this and that. He sort of touched on the truth without really driving it home. And, every once in a while you'd see in a national publication a review of Butch's album. I remember Richard Harrington reviewed the first album in the Washington Post, and I don't think I'm not sure that he got it. He called him a Rockville Cockney Neil Young impersonator, something along those lines. And I remember Butch reading the review, and Butch had this very selective way of looking at things. I mean, he basically got panned in the Washington Post in this review of the first album. But he got to the Neil Young part, and he says, he's reading all this stuff and is not saying anything. He gets to the Neil Young thing, he says I sound like Neil Young. And that's basically all he saw in that article. It's like selectovision or whatever. It's actually kind of a neat thing to have, I suppose. See no evil.
Was he? I couldn't get him to confirm this yesterday. He had no memory of it. But what I understood was that when Forthcomings came out, Rounder Records was like really interested.
Oh yeah.
In the band.
Yes.
They asked them to record demos. And then,
yes.
And then they recorded like these really slick sounding songs that didn't really sound.
No, they didn't get that far. No.
Okay.
I remember one day I was sitting in the record store and I got a call from this guy from Rounder Records. And at the time, Rounder Records had the best independent distribution for, smaller labels, for folk, for bluegrass, for rock and roll, for God knows what. If you weren't on a major label, if you weren't on MCI, or if you weren't on Warner Brothers or Columbia, and you were very lucky and very good, you got distribution from Rounder Distribution. And this guy calls me up and says, is this Joe Lee? And I said, yeah. And he says, do you have something to do with the Butch Willis group? And I said, yeah. He says, well, we'd like to distribute Butch's albums here. And I said, yeah, how come? And he says, well, there's a kind of a buzz on him up here in Massachusetts. And I don't know how the guy did it, but I had interviewed Butch, just sort of a kind of a gag kind of thing, really. I mean, it was a college, a kid working for me was taking a college course in video this or that, and decided that I should interview somebody. And I said, well, let me interview Butch. And it was actually very one of a kindish, let's say. And this guy up in Massachusetts had the goddamn thing. I mean, how could I don't know? It never ran on the air. And then a couple years later, Tommy Ardolino from NRBQ, which is a group that's been around since the '60s. It was started off in Columbia, and I think they were on Rounder for a while, and lots of different labels. I think Mercury at one point. I know they were on Warner's too. But NRBQ had just done an appearance at I guess it was the Bayou down in Georgetown, and he comes walking into the store, and I recognized him. I said, "You're Tommy Ardolino from NRBQ. Come on in." And he's looking at me and he says, "You're the guy that interviewed Butch." And I said, "How do you know that?" He says, "Everybody in the Northeast has got that video." So somebody, I don't know how it happened, but apparently that was like really a thing. But here's all these, that's what used to irk people in this area. We've got a lot of really great musicians in the Washington, D.C. area, and some of them are very much full of themselves too. And here I get, this maniac Root Boy Slim. The band's together for less than a year. We're on Warner Brothers. Butch Willis, who does these insane records that none of these people can understand or appreciate, and yet I get a call from Rounder Records begging me to send them the album so they can distribute Butch's stuff, while turning them down en masse. So it was like we had a hell of a success rate with this kind of stuff, and it used to piss people off. I mean, these brilliant jazz piano players or singers or whatever, and they never got anywhere. And they weren't very interesting. That's probably what the problem was. Butch was pretty interesting. So was Root Boy too.
I have an old No Trend insert from a No Trend record that says...
Oh, we've got those boots up there.
Oh, wow. Oh, the No Trend boots?
Yes,
nice.
They're up there. See, up to the Joe's. Yeah. Very Plus cool. the No Trend cover that they're on. Remember that? They're.
Oh yeah.
Jeff Menches is hanging in the closet behind him are the
Las
boots.
Vegas polyester or something.
Tetronic or some bullshit.
Was Forthcoming's? Because at some point there was a No Trend insert that said "Coming soon on No Trend Records, Butch Willis on the Rocks."
I guess that was the third album that didn't happen, So maybe that was Concrete and Bird Feathers. He had the greatest titles. I don't know. He was pretty much a lunatic, but, he's a hell of a lot more interesting than Journey, you know what I mean? To me, anyway. All right. So how are we going to get the boots on there,
That's some good stuff.
Oh, let me do a couple of quick ones here.
Go for it.
At some point, I guess Butch figured out that Al Breon, the throat guitar player that I had added to the group, was getting probably as much attention as he was. And he became very jealous of Al. And not only that, but, Butch loved groups like Journey and Bachman Turner Overdrive or whoever the hell they were. And they didn't have throat guitar players in their group, so goddamn it, why was he being saddled with a throat guitar player, So he always kept it, he would never tell, if we had a gig somewhere in Baltimore or D.C. or Rockville or Timonium, who knows. He would try and keep it from Al, but Al would always find out because he hung out at the record store too, and he would sometimes know before Butch would. And he kept trying to get rid of Al and just couldn't seem to be able to do that. It was much to his dismay. There was one other thing. I remember when we did the Forestville Rock video for Jeff Krulik. And Jeff says, what should we do? We want to get him dressed up like a rock star. And I said, I've got just the thing. I've got some python skin boots that have like, 6-inch risers on them. And so I presented those things to Butch. I said, put them on. He said, no, I'm not putting those on. I said, Butch, come on, you've seen the videos with the, guys with the shiny outfits and stuff, and they're wearing boots like this. Come on, no. But anyway, I had my way, and he put them on, and they're not the easiest things to maneuver in because, the goddamn heels are, they're gigantic. And he's up there on stage doing this video and prancing around and took a fall and just couldn't get back up because the boots were, you need help when you're wearing stuff like that. But there was just millions of moments like that were just great moments that will never be replaced by any other things I've ever experienced because they couldn't possibly ever happen again. These were, anything that happened with Butch, believe me, was so unique and so strange and so weird and usually humorous that it stood alone. All was well. All right.
All right, cool, thank you.
Should I bring the boots back so you can... One of the things that made the record store in the 80s even more crazy was a guy named Jeff Menchez, who actually produced the forthcoming album. But he also had this great talent to imitate people's voices. And he had Butch's voice down, just really down, and he had Ray Wallace, the guitar player in the group, had his voice down too. Two very distinct voices, a little bit on the crazy side, but he had them pegged. And every once in a while he'd wander in the back, and I'd never hear him. He would be calling Butch as Ray, threatening to quit the group and whatever. And then he would call Ray as Butch, threatening to fire him and just starting up all this mayhem. And sooner or later, Butch would call Ray in reality and bring up all this stuff, and Ray would have no idea what he was talking about, or vice versa. So there was like a couple of years there where they were just completely confused. I think Ray finally caught on, probably because I told him. But otherwise, they had no idea. I'm telling you.
Excellent.
Jeff, we had Jeff call up Harrington one time, and I had this running thing with Harrington. We were playing a lot of racquetball back then. That Bruce Springsteen is the most overrated singer in the history of music. That was just something we both firmly believed in. Well, I'm reading the Washington Post, and there's this big, gooey, glowing review of the remember the box set Live that Springsteen put out?
Yeah.
You see thousands of them in thrift stores and whatever. And it's by Harrington. So I really got pissed off. I said, what the f*** is this? So I got a gal from the pizza store. We really set this up, and I had her call Richard up, and she says, Richard Harrington, please. Richard says, yes, calling us home, And he says, could you please hold for Bruce Springsteen? So he says, oh, hold on for a second. He runs upstairs and plugs in all this, the reel-to-reel and all this kind of shit. And he goes, hello? And then Jeff gets on there, and it was beautiful. Hey, little fella, just want to thank for that real nice review there in the Washington Post. And Richard's like cooing on the phone. I swear to God. See, oh, it's my pleasure. Do you think maybe we can get together for an interview? I'd love to do something like that. Yeah, it's like, I think we can work it out. And then Jeff burst out laughing. It was outside. I grabbed everybody and said, look, you asshole, you've been had. He didn't talk to me for 2 weeks, and he has never played that tape for anyone. But Jeff was good, What happened is that I think Doc's marriage was breaking up. And he, I guess, was a little on the bitter side or whatever. And him and Steve Lorber went to the cellar door. And the idea being that Joe was going to cover the show for the Washington Post. And I think that when Keith Carradine got to the point where he said, now I'm going to do a song called I'm Mr. Blue, which was originally done by the Fleetwoods. It was a very pretty song, and which was obviously about to get slaughtered by Keith Carradine. he announced he's going to do the song. Joe asked me, goes, "Oh, please!" I guess a little too loud. Sam Mohamedou, who's a partner of Jack Boyle for the Cellar Door Incorporated, overhears this. He goes rushing upstairs and calls the Post and complains. So they kicked Joe off the Washington Post for like 6 months, something like that. He didn't like it anyway because he says they were a bunch of prepsters. They all hated each other, and And it wasn't that far after that Joe got hired on by Time Life Warner, and he's done very, very well with them, I'll tell you. But I guess he just didn't like Keith all that much.
Round numbers aren't too bad. It's just really, it always gives you the wrong thing. Like,
You ought to get the signed Butch Willis thing too. Oh, here's one for you. Did you ever see this? Now look at this. Now this poor guy comes in to the record store, and he's a writer for Goldmine, and he really likes the store. So he tells Tim, who was there, I'd like to interview Joe because I'd like to do an article on for Goldmine. So Tim calls me up, and that was during the weekend. This guy wants to interview me at 12 noon on Monday. I said, okay, fine. So that Saturday night, Ray calls me up from like Oklahoma or wherever he was living, Colorado. That's what it was. And he says he starts talking like James Mason. He does a real good James Mason. I said, well, James Mason's dead. Can you do somebody who's alive? He goes into Gregory Peck, who at the time was still alive. And I got to think, I said, Ray, let's do something really crazy here. You called me at 12:15 in the record store as Gregory Peck looking for records. Let's see if we can snooker this guy. And Ray went to all this trouble. He looked up like zip codes in California, in the town that the guy lives in, and I just had it down. And if you look at while interviewing for this piece, the phone rang in Lee's office. He picked up the receiver and looked as though he had been called by a ghost. After chatting for a while, he told the caller he was sitting with a reporter from Goldmine and asked if he would like to speak to him. The stentorian voice on the other end of the phone was unmistakable. Even Gregory Peck has to buy his records somewhere. What a bastard I am. I couldn't resist, though. I never told the guy about, who it really was on the phone.